All right, all welcome to the last of our webinar series in the Navigating the New TEKS. Today we'll be talking about unlocking the power of ADI instructional models, or the ADI instructional materials, sorry. As we usually do with the webinars, we'll be doing about 15 minutes or so of new content. Then I'll have some time for questions, and then we'll wrap up with directions on things that you need to know coming up after that for the last few minutes of this. Don't forget, you have CEU credits available. All you have to do is sign up for the webinars and attend, and then we can send you out those continuing education unit credits, and we plan on doing that right after this last session. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, today what we're going to be doing is talking about unlocking the power of ADI instructional materials. My name is Vic Sampson. I'm an associate professor of STEM education at the University of Texas at Austin, one of the people that have developed ADI throughout the years. We also have Jill Gregory here today. She'll be watching over the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there. We can also unmute your mic and things like that. So if you want to just talk through this, just let us know if you need any of that. If you have any questions about needing resources or where you can get a hold of the recordings or anything like that, Jill will be able to help you out as we kind of go through this session. So make sure you just kind of type in what you need, and we're here to help you out. So let's go ahead and get started. So with this series, looking back, we kicked off by talking about the biggest changes in the new TEKS. And the four things we really talked about was that, not surprising, there's new content. It's either added or removed in each grade. And we kind of looked at these side by side. Here's a picture of one from 8th grade. Excuse me. That's not surprising when we have new TEKS. Usually we'll say, okay, we need to focus on this more or this less, or move this around. However, in this round, we have the addition of the new science and engineering practice and the addition of recurring themes and concepts, and getting rid of process kinds of skills out of there for those. And then there's this expectation for instruction and assessment to be three-dimensional instead of two or one-dimensional, right? So these are like the biggest changes that we discussed for the first series. Then we started talking a little bit about, well, what does three-dimensional instruction look like? We talked about the 3 dimensions of science, and we also talked about what this would look like in terms of what kids are doing inside classrooms, right? So the idea that if you have the science and engineering practices, disciplinary content, and recurring themes and practices, when you're focusing all of that on the same time, and you have students use content, a framework, and practices to figure out a phenomenon, that's when you really have three-dimensional instruction happening. We also talked about this roadmap, where we can kind of think about, well, what would a three-dimensional lesson or unit look like? And I kind of suggested these kind of elements of that, right? Like, you're sharing a phenomenon that lacks an explanation. You're getting kids to talk about their ideas about why that happens. That's often done through building a model of some kind. You'll listen to students' questions about what they don't really understand, which really primes them for learning more content and recurring themes. Then you can introduce some of those new ideas and recurring themes, or bring them up if you've covered them in the past as a review. Then students use these ideas to, along with their investigative practice, to gather information or test ideas. Then they engage in sense-making practices to develop an explanation, communicative practice to share, critiquing to share and refine that explanation, and that cycle can go on until you finally end up with students having a acceptable explanation for that phenomenon that you originally had. So if you're kind of going through this process, this is the kind of thing you'll see going on inside the classroom when kids are engaged in three-dimensional instruction. We also talked about three-dimensional assessment. So the idea, if instruction is going to be focusing on the 3 dimensions of science, so should assessment, right? So this idea that kids are being asked to use content, recurring themes and concepts, and engineering practices, that they can demonstrate their ability to do that, right? And it's not just of things that they've learned already about, so kind of repeating information that they've been told, but actually getting new phenomenon, and then having to use the content that they've been taught, the framework and those practices, to figure out an explanation, much like they're doing in class. So the idea behind three-dimensional assessment looks very much like what they're doing each and every day when they're engaged in three-dimensional instruction. Okay. We talked a little bit also about kind of this checklist of what we can do to see if an assessment is three-dimensional, right? So beginning with an unfamiliar phenomenon, providing information about that phenomenon, and then using those three dimensions, and then making their use or understanding of the three dimensions visible to you, right? So you can see how they're progressing, right? So that's kind of the characteristics of three-dimensional assessment. Now, what I think with the big rollout with these new TEKS, and why we wanted to put on this webinar series in the first place, is it's a big change, right? It's not the usual small tweaks that we do from year to year. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we as a field of educators are going to have is getting instructional materials and assessments that are actually 3D into the hands of the teachers. That's one of the reasons we wanted to talk a little bit about evaluating instructional materials, thinking about that, because there is funding right now through the proclamation for people to adopt new materials and use those to go out there. But I think it's really important to think about what kind of learning experiences you want. Are we actually getting 3D things into the hands of teachers who need them so they can support their students? So what I wanted to do today is kind of show you how we can use argument-driven inquiry to help fill this need, right? So we've been working in this space of developing instructional materials and assessments for about 8 or 9 years now. And we've been focusing really heavily on how to make things three-dimensional in a way that is not overcomplicated, not over time-consuming, not really challenging for teachers to pick up and students to get used to and really be successful. So I wanted to kind of show you a little bit of the materials that we have here that allow you to kind of get started and unlock the power of these different pieces. So I'm going to stop sharing here real quick, and I'm going to share a different window. Okay, so this window here is what we call our Learning Hub, and it's basically just what we've done to try to make the use of three-dimensional instruction possible for lots of folks that this is new to. So right now I have this on as our teacher in my teacher account of this. And when you go in here, we have this dashboard, which you'll see when you first log in. And you can set up different classes. Like I use mine for model teaching up at different school districts or in my science methods course to show them stuff. It shows your investigations that you have students in classrooms working on, the ones you've finished. You've had finished assessments, and you also have active assessments, which I don't have going on right now. You also this tool that allows you to add users, right? So you can add different students in this. They'll tell them what they're working on. You can add tags. So like if a kid has an IEP, you can make sure you're not missing that. You can look at student details, that kind of stuff, change permissions and those kinds of things. When you get then in there as well, I'm going to go back to the dashboard. The investigations then, we've got 250 plus or so of these different investigations that you can use. You can go to lessons here, and we've got some there for math, and we've also got engineering. But you can go into science, for example. And what it does is it opens our full library for you. And when you get in there, you can see each of these investigations, and you can start searching for things. So you can see the standard that it addresses here for Texas, but also with the core idea, the disciplinary content, the recurring theme, and the science and engineering practices that are really emphasized there. Like I said before, you can filter by different grades, disciplines, core ideas, all of those kinds of things, or just do a keyword search. So I'm going to look through here. Let's look at, I'm going to go back a page here. I'm actually going to go, we also have the adoption materials for this round, so we can look at any number of these different pieces. And I'm actually going to put in one that we've used before. Oh, actually, take that back. So that's your library. If you want to look at the library or any of these investigations, you can just click on this view investigation and do a quick preview and see all of the pieces on this. Now, what I'm going to do is actually show you one that I've launched. So when you go in here, I'm going to go into one of my active assessments, and I'm going to look at the cans of Coke and Diet Coke is one of the ones we've talked about during this series. So I'm going to go to the investigation dashboard here. So once I've assigned this investigation to one of my classes, I can go into the dashboard and download all the handouts that kids would need. So if you want to do this in person completely, you can get standards, you can get all of the handouts that you would need to run with this. Just download all of those. You can also then view the investigation when set up. So what we've got now that to make life easier for teachers is a presentation mode. So what that allows you to do is, as a teacher, you're able to have this screen going and lead kids through the process, right? So we lead, so for example, one of the things we were talking about, that roadmap for instruction, the importance of introducing a puzzling phenomenon and then eliciting kids' ideas about that. So we have all of those built in to this process, right? So we can show students, students this. We have a full screen mode that you can use, and then show the video of introducing kids to that. Then you can encourage them as you move through this. You can click onto the next step or move around on the side here, and then you can have kids share what they've noticed. Then we can talk about what they're trying to figure out, why the can of Coca-Cola sink and the cans of Diet Coke float. Then what we can do is have them draw their model, right, to get their ideas thinking, and then get back to that idea of, okay, now that we have this model, what do we need to learn more about? Right, so it gives you a really easy way to kind of guide kids through this process. And then it has all of the other different stages in there to help them introduce new ideas to them, ways to plan an investigation, share their ideas, reflect on what they've learned, all of these kinds of pieces, so you as a teacher can kind of discuss these. So it gets you a really good starting point, especially if you're new to this. And it also includes teacher tips for each activity as you move through there and those kinds of things. So it's a great way to get started with this when it might seem kind of overwhelming. In addition to that, let's do this go again. You can also see submissions that kids have made. On this one, I was just demoing, so I didn't have any kids do this where they're entering them without paper because I was using the paper version of this, but this is where you would find any of their work in there. And if I had students enrolled in the class, you could see where they're progressing and all of those kinds of things. The other big thing that we have here is the assessments. I think there was a question a couple of sessions ago about where to find assessments. And we have built tons of these here. So you have a full library of assessments as well. So if you go to Science, for example, we're adding new ones all of this time. You can kind of get an idea of where these are. So we talked about the horse nettles and caterpillars. So if you're looking through that, you can preview that assessment. So this one has 4 parts. It'll show the video that their kids are watching, a quick just preview of the kind of activity they're doing. You can see the answer they'll get and the 2-tiered questions. Then you can move through the other ones and see what you're doing with that. If you like that assessment, then you can assign it to the kids. Once it's assigned, it'll be in your dashboard. And once kids are finished with it, you can actually start analyzing things that kids are doing. So that one I haven't assigned, but I'm going to take you one that I have. So polar bears and black bears in Alaska. I think we showed you that one before. If you go to this one, we can once again get all the downloads if you want to do it paper-based, right? You can also view the assessment and presentation mode like before, right? So you can show this on the screen as you're moving through it so kids can see the color versions. Then you also have the ability to view, change how many number of submissions, if it's editable after the kids submitted, open date, open time, close date, close time by students, so you can give kids extra time. This is what I'm pretty thrilled with. So if the kids do it in the system instead of paper, you can use a lot of the tools that we have built in here. So for example, if you want to view responses, you can see every student's answers just by clicking on here, and you can see if they answered correctly and then what their reason was. Okay, so I can do that to any number of different students. that shows that this student sorted everything correctly. Then you can check their answer. But the coolest part about it is looking at the summary tool. So what this does for you is the system automatically scores the first here, the answer, and so into categories of correct and incorrect. And then what it'll do is sort by their reasons by those answers. So for all the kids that answered this one correctly, you can go down here and you can read all of their reasons and you can start looking for patterns. Right, I think one of the hardest things when it comes to assessment is analyzing them, right? So we often end up just doing percentages, or this many kids are proficient or not proficient, but it's really hard to really understand, okay, did they answer that question for the right reason? Or if they didn't, what do I need to focus on? What do they seem to be saying here that I need to really reteach or support kids as they're working, right? So it makes it really easy to be able to do that. You can also go in here and you can look at ones that are multiple choice here. I'll show you this one. And if you use the summary here, so this one happened to be a multiple choice for question one. And so the kids that picked A, which is the correct one, you can see all their answers or all their reasons, and then also the reasons for each of the distractors. Right, so it gives you an opportunity to really see and make sense of what kids are thinking in this way. The other nice thing about when you're grading any of these materials, so I'm going to go down to here, the one that hasn't been graded yet. Perfect. So when you're going to grade one of these, it automatically scores the answer so we can do the summary feature. And it gives you the reason. So that's right next to you there. So then what you can do for student is you can provide score with feedback. So they see what you scored, their answer, their score only, or their feedback only. So when we're doing the assessment score, I can do, well, that was, they said incorrect there, so incorrect. And then I can look at the reason, is it partially correct or incorrect? And then I can give them feedback. And then once I hit grade, whatever I want them to set for them to see goes back to the kids. So if they have score only, they'll see no feedback. If you say score or feedback only, they won't see the score, but they'll see the feedback, and they'll have both with that. And then as well as on their dashboard, then too, there's buttons that say you have to look at the feedback. Once you look at the feedback, it'll reopen and allow them to resubmit if you've set this assessment to have more than one submission. So for example, if you set it for 2, you can add all of this to all these different kids one at a time, or all of them, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really powerful and useful tool for doing that kind of stuff of getting 3-dimensional instruction and assessment happening. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you with the time we had. As usual, we'll post the recording of this webcast at this site. Please feel free to share this link to anybody, even if they don't want the continuing education unit credits. Feel free to share widely. I can't speak today. That's all we've got in this series. We will be doing more in January, but we're going to be taking a break for the holidays here. We'll be running webinar series. I'll be doing another one on Thursdays over different topics. Kind of like a series of them we're going to talk with. They're nice and short. And then we're running another one with Dr. Todd Hutner. He will be doing Tuesdays on this, with an idea of trying to get people access to kind of this information that we need. So I will do a little talking about the new TEKS again in January, but we'll also be talking more, going in more in depth with assessment and what how ideas for supporting teaching this way, talking about ways to support conversations, make classrooms more inclusive, helping kids with reading and writing, all of these different things. So they'll all be nice, short, bite-sized chunks that you can kind of jump in for a half hour, hopefully grab some good tidbits, and then get back to your week. So I really want to thank everybody for joining us for this series. If you have any questions or anything, please contact us, and have a great holiday.